The Maryland State Department of Education, Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement, is pleased to present the third webinar in the series, High Leverage Practices for Supporting Diverse Learners in the Virtual Classroom. My name is Ed Mitzel, and I'm the Executive Director in the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. Our team has three main goals: to foster the growth of effective leaders, to ensure valid and reliable evaluations, and to raise the quality of education for students in Maryland. We are pleased to partner with Insight Education Group for this third webinar in the series. At this time, I'd like to introduce the presenters who will be with you for the remainder of this webinar, Kia Johnson and Kim Day.
I'm Kia Johnson, Project Coach with Insight Education Group.
And I'm Kim Day, also a Project Coach with Insight Education Group. We're glad you're here to join us today.
For our time together today, we ask that everyone participates actively, that you remain open to new ideas, and that you trust the process. The session materials that you need for today include the accompanying participant guide, which you can find by going to the camera setting on your phone and scanning the QR code. You can also access the materials at the Maryland Resource Hub, which you can access by going to the link.
You'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that there's a page 2. That number corresponds to the participant guide. We're going to give you just a moment to download your materials.
Thank you, Kim.
Today during our session, we are going to identify high leverage practices to support diverse learners in the virtual classroom and build capacity around observing virtual instruction and coaching to support the needs of diverse learners. We acknowledge that people come to the table with different levels of expertise and different experiences. We empathize that this situation is unique and will be a challenging learning experience for all. The following provides a roadmap of our time together today. Take a moment to review the structure of the session. We first want to think about the connections and through lines that exist and how we can intentionally build equitable experiences for all learners by ensuring that we are providing supports needed and by attending to the social and emotional needs of our students.
So before we jump in today, we'd like to take a moment to ensure that we are all on the same page with respect to terminology. Diverse learners are students who bring a broad array of learning styles, varying academic histories and needs, and may also have cultural and linguistic differences. Educational equity means that every student has access to the opportunities, resources, and educational rigor that they need throughout their educational career to maximize academics. In today's session, we will be investigating high leverage practices that ensure educational equity for all learners and maximize outcomes for diverse learners.
Just a reminder that this is a short webinar, but yet action-oriented. Opportunities will be offered to stop, jot, and capture thinking and ideas. Our goal is to provide you with the space and time to begin creating actionable plans. It will be necessary to complete the development outside of our time together.
Absolutely. We'd also like to remind you that equity considerations are essential. As we shift to remote learning, it is critical to consider how we maintain equitable learning experiences for all learners. The Guide to Educational Equity in Maryland calls for leaders to approach equity with urgency so that all children can realize the promise of public education. The importance of educational equity and its relationship to educational excellence is highlighted throughout the guide, but more importantly, it is and must continue to be evident in our work. The work of the MSDE staff and the State Board over the last 3 years has focused on a greater understanding the needs of diverse learners, which we will continue to explore today. It is also important to remember that it's essential to uphold the federal requirements for equity compliance in virtual learning environments as well as in face-to-face situations.
During the session today, we'll be making intentional connections between the domains of the Danielson Framework, the professional standards for educational leaders, and the national standards for quality online teaching. It's important to recognize that the areas of focus and strategies presented align to these teaching standards and professional learning standards.
Also, we'd like to remind you that flexibility is crucial. In the present context, there are many variables and unknowns. The ability to adapt as needed will be key. In that same vein, individualized approaches are also key. As we seek to provide personalized learning experiences for all students, it will be critical to be nimble and responsive to varying needs as they arise.
Thank you, Kia. So let's begin by taking a moment to examine the quote on the screen. Delegate Alonzo T. Washington in this quote reminds us that children come to the table with varying backgrounds, skills, and needs, and the impact of their home environments will only be exacerbated during school closures. While support measures and interventions will look different in the current context, it's critical to consider how to build both the key academic and social emotional supports to maximize outcomes for students.
And so with that, we're going to start off with jumping into talking about building equity in our virtual school communities. The connection to Danielson today is the planning and preparation strand 1B, stating that the teacher understands the active nature of student learning and acquires information about levels of development for individual students. The teacher also systematically acquires knowledge from several sources about individual students' varied approaches to learning, knowledge and skills, special needs, and interests and cultural heritages. The professional standard for educational leaders 3 calls for equity and cultural responsiveness, stating that the effective educational leader collaboratively establishes specific and measurable goals for equity that are informed by data and are in alignment with student needs. This is so important because the equity problems that plague K-12 education under normal conditions have only been exacerbated and worsened by the shift to online learning during school closures. And that makes it even more urgent for us to consider how we continue to build and sustain equity.
So let's go ahead and let's begin. So as we think about building equity in our virtual school communities, it will be critical to be intentional about building and maintaining equity in the virtual classroom. That includes ensuring that existing inequities are considered as we fulfill our responsibility to reach all learners. It will be important to meet each child where they are and to provide the appropriate scaffolds and to ensure that all students are learning at high levels.
And so one of the ways to begin doing this is to conduct an equity review, which is an effective way to assess the current inequities that exist and to plan for how to address them. It is important to remember that equity should be embedded in every aspect of our school communities. One tool to help you unpack your building or district level needs is the Guide to Educational Equity in Maryland. The guide was developed to assist local school systems with the implementation of equitable practices and structures for all students. Maryland's focus areas for building equitable school communities are academic achievement and growth, leadership and human capital, school climate and culture, and educator and staff capacity. These areas of focus remain even in the virtual environment.
The considerations from MSDE's Equity and Excellence Guide serve to help organize the collection of data from needs assessments and other sources, assist in delving deeply into existing and identified challenges and the root causes, aid in exploring ways to maximize resources related to goals, and how to model how to use the equity lens as you develop your plans for your virtual school community.
So regardless of what tools you use to assess the equity needs in your context, the most important aspect will be the action steps taken to ensure that the structures, resources, and necessary supports exist to provide every student with what they need to succeed. While it will be important to examine all 4 equity action areas, today we will highlight academic achievement and growth and school climate and culture. The guide calls for us to identify and address any barriers that prevent students from equitably accessing educational opportunities. This is even more critical to do in the virtual environment. Use your equity review to identify gaps, acknowledge their root causes, and develop a plan to address those gaps.
In terms of school climate and culture, according to the MSDE Equity and Excellence Guide, A key component of a strong climate and culture is the ability to alleviate the attendance barriers. In the virtual setting, it will be key to identify challenges that exist for families regarding connectivity, access to devices, and the ability for responsible caregivers to support their learning while at home. Additionally, we must ensure that the policies and practices that are in place for the virtual community are inclusive and support the participation of all students and their families. So we're going to take a moment now and we're going to pause and plan. As you think about how you and your staff currently plan and prepare to build and maintain equity in the virtual context, consider the following. What is your current reality? What's been working? What challenges has your team experienced? Then consider what opportunities exist to strengthen equity and enhance diverse student learning. Take a moment to jot down these ideas on page 3 of your participant guide. Be sure to include how you will hold yourself accountable. We're going to pause now for just a few moments to allow you some time to think and jot.
So as you start to develop your plans, we'd like to share a few of the considerations, look-fors, or action steps that you may have started to begin to outline. So as you think about how you will prioritize equity and enhance diverse student learning, it's important to plan to conduct an equity review to reveal and acknowledge the existing inequities in your school community. It may also be helpful to create a work group to develop an implementation plan to specifically target and mitigate the impact of those existing inequities. As you think about how you can ensure equitable and meaningful learning experiences for all learners, it's important to remember to set clear and consistent expectations for teachers regarding the planning and preparation of their online lessons, and also identify who will be responsible for monitoring and providing ongoing observation and feedback for that development.
We're now going to move into part 2 of our webinar today, providing individualized instruction. This component of our learning is aligned to the Danielson Planning and Preparation Component 1E, which states, the sequence of learning activities follows a coherent sequence, is aligned to instructional goals, and is designed to engage students in high-level cognitive activity. These are appropriately differentiated for individual learners. Instructional groups are varied appropriately with some opportunity for student choice. This particular segment is also aligned to PSEL Standard 5, Community of Care and Support for Students, which states the effective educational leader collaboratively establishes a continuum of academic and socio-emotional supports informed by data to address the needs and range of learners of each student group, thus ensuring that students with disabilities and English language learners have opportunities to learn with their non-disabled and English proficient peers. For a moment, let's focus on why we might spend time exploring the importance of providing individualized instruction in the virtual classroom environment. In order to meet the needs of diverse learners effectively, it's essential to identify and plan to respond to individual student-level needs.
Absolutely, Kim. And it's also critical to be intentional about integrating individualized instruction in order to do so. And this includes ensuring that teams of counselors, pupil personnel workers, educators, and families have the opportunity to collaborate to build individualized plans that are responsive to the needs of both the student and the family. It is also imperative that the curriculum is tailored to focus on the most critical skills required for success according to the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards, and that all educators and support staff are provided with the tools necessary to meet the needs of diverse learners.
In order to set purposeful and individualized environments, it will be important to build meaningful partnerships in support of the learner.
In order to begin, educators must realize that intentional norms, structures, and schedules will need to be co-created with students and families at the center.
Family focus is a buy-in, and it's a critical component of the development of the plans that adequately support diverse learners, as students will benefit most from the wraparound support of a collaborative team of educators and supporters.
So one way for teachers and related service providers to reach out to families and establish a plan of support that meets the student and family's needs is to administer a feedback survey targeting distant learning supports. Many of your districts or schools may have already implemented such a survey.
Thank you, Kia. And that feedback survey provides the opportunity for all educators who work with the student to identify key information, including access to reliable internet and devices, preferred methods of communication, and information regarding the optimal times the student is available to receive educational services.
It's also important to remember that each student's situation is unique and that this is just one of the first steps in gathering the background and context required to develop a specific and actionable plan. For example, you also need to consider how to provide communication in multiple languages for non-English speaking families, and you would also want to consider diverse methods for submission, including electronic submission, submitting by mail, or community drop-off locations.
And just a note, as we examine these support documents, none of these templates replace an IEP or other federally required documents, but instead seek to support their overall implementation in the virtual environment.
And if you would like to see another example of a feedback survey, please access the Maryland Resource Hub folder for this webinar.
So as we think about developing personalized learning experiences for diverse learners, it will also be important to focus on the most critical skills for mastery of the key content.
In our last webinar, we engaged in the process of identifying the student learning targets embedded in standards. In addition to narrowing the focus of curriculum, it will also be imperative to consider a learner's individual strengths and areas of development when making decisions around personalized instruction.
Being intentional in identifying a student's current skill level ensures that we can meet the child where they are, thus preparing them to take the next step.
So one of the ways to identify where students are and to meet those needs is this tool that we'd like you to review called the Needs at a Glance tool. This is a resource that compiles the specific and actionable information from a variety of sources, including an IEP, a 504 plan, an English learner support plan, or any other specialized plans for distance learning, an effort to provide educators with the information necessary to best reach the student in the virtual setting.
So let's give you just a moment to find this document on page 6 of your participant guide. We'll just give you 30 seconds or so to skim it over, and then we'll start back. As you reviewed the document, we hope you noticed that the tool identifies relevant classifications, student strengths, and opportunities for growth. There's also a list of accommodations that should be implemented in the virtual environment that can be easily referred to as the teacher plans for individualized instruction.
In addition to the academically centered needs of the learner, the tool also highlights critical SEL considerations, like the fact that this particular student has a parent that works overnight and is therefore generally unavailable to support the student during typical instructional hours.
As we continue to think about how to provide students with personalized support, Standard F of the National Standards for Quality Online Teaching states that the online teacher is cognizant of the diversity of students' academic needs and incorporates accommodations into the online environment.
Here we have the components of that standard in the rubric and their corresponding indicators on the Danielson framework. Take a moment to review.
You can find this document on page 7 in your participant guide. The effective online teacher is intentional about doing the following when providing individualized learning experiences for diverse learners. monitoring and interpreting learner progress and providing the necessary additional supports in response, incorporating the required accommodations and modifications and collaborates with the team to meet learner needs, collects and uses data to make informed instructional decisions and identifies when learners need additional support, increases access by creating alternative formats to course materials, and finally, builds joy into personalized learning by leveraging learner talents and strengths and providing them with choice.
Thank you, Kim. In just a moment, we'll explore the presence of these elements as we debrief a virtual lesson scenario.
So before we do that, I just want us to think back to webinar 2, remembering that the critical components of a student-focused online instructional model can be used to plan for quality instructional opportunities that meet students at their current level and guide the teacher to provide actionable instructional moves in the classroom using technology tools that can be most advantageous in the learning environment.
And this is the planning structure that was used in the virtual lesson that we will debrief through the lens of supporting the needs of diverse learners.
Thank you, Kia. We'll now revisit our virtual classroom scenario from webinar 2. You may recall that Mrs. Apple's coach committed to observing small group remediation as the data from the initial lesson revealed that there were students that did not actively contribute to the discussion and group tasks, and thus all did not master the skill.
In today's post-visit conversation, we'll debrief a session with 8 students, 2 of whom did not participate in the first lesson due to connectivity issues, 2 students with IEPs, 1 English language learner, 3 students that received Tier 2 interventions in the traditional setting.
We also have the student output from one of the breakout rooms in response to a prompt from the novel read aloud. Please take 2 minutes to review these documents beginning on page 8 of the participant guide. So let's go ahead and let's transition into the post-conference conversation with Ms. Apple. Please continue to follow along on pages 8 and 9 with the evidence and collected information. You ready, Ms. Apple?
I'm ready.
So we're going to role play a post-conference reflection conversation focusing on the high leverage strategies used to support the diverse learners in the lesson observed. Ms. Apple is going to reflect on the impact of those strategies on student learning during the lesson. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right in. Ready?
All
right. Okay. All right, Ms. Apple, well, thank you so much again for including me in the small group lesson. Thanks for letting me be in one of those small groups. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, I appreciate it. And we're going to just, if it's okay with you, spend just a little bit of time reflecting on what students were able to do during this time, specifically thinking about the impact that those high leverage strategies that you were intentional about.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's just start with that question. What were students able to do during our time together? What were they able to walk away with, and how do you know?
So kind of the baseline skill that I wanted students to be able to do was just one, define an inference. And so the exit ticket that I've now administered to all students in the section reveals that they are all confident in understanding what an inference is and know when they see the word inference, on a test or in a question stem, what they should be doing and how they should be thinking. So I'm really excited about that because I think that sets us up to kind of get into some of the other embedded skills. As you know, I was really, really focused on making sure that the students were able to pull direct evidence and cite events or quotes from the text that align to the inferences that they were making about what was going to be happening or what was going on in the novel that we're reading together. And when we originally did the lesson, it was really, really challenging for me to be able to ensure that all students were able to do that. As you can recall, they were in a breakout room working together, and I did have a way to monitor what they were doing, but I just wasn't able to ensure and hold each student accountable for their individual contributions. In the small group session, I had a lot better outcomes with being able to maximize individual student input and to be able to see exactly what they were thinking, exactly what they contributed, and where in that collective response they had actually contributed and what their thinking was in terms of how they were selecting and citing evidence. So that is something that was just amazing to be able to see. And so I was able to see that 7 of the 8 students in the group that I was working with are really confident and doing a great job being able to select very explicit direct quotes from the text and embedding those into the inferences that they're making. I do have one student that is still not confident with that and did not actively contribute in the group setting as well.
So as you think about it, let's label specifically what was the practice that you put in place this time that really allowed students to make or take that next step?
So we worked together to modify the graphic organizer that I was using, the note tracker. So when students broke up into 2 smaller groups of 4, I was able to spend a good chunk of time with both groups, but the note tracker was reformatted to have a space for each individual student to collect their data, their direct quotes or evidence from the text, and to put that into the tracker. And then they used those pieces of evidence to collectively come together to collaborate and write a response. And so I was able to see what each student was doing and thinking, and then also able to really, really monitor while I was with one group just to make sure that they were still remaining on task when I was in with the other group. The other thing that I think made a huge difference was the amount of time. So all of the students that I was working with in this session have either 504 plans or IEPs that call for more time to work on a task. So originally they were in the small groups for about 10 minutes. We worked together for 15 minutes as a group, and then they broke out into their smaller groups for 20 minutes. So they just had a lot more time. So I think processed together with me as we were doing some guided practice, but then as they were working independently, they again had just a longer period of time to work together.
Excellent. So I want to point out, just based on what I observed, and I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of that, your flexibility and responsiveness to really the restructuring of the groups, number one, the graphic organizers, just as you just mentioned, and that restructuring again of that document, right, of the note tracker. That really was the key, I think, to watching students be able to engage. And I know too, just from looking at the note tracker itself and being able to look at the student responses, it did allow you to see what was going on with both groups, even though you were not necessarily in the room with both groups at the same time. So that obviously made a difference. So please continue to build on that. I know you mentioned the one student who was still struggling a bit. So have you thought maybe about what's a potential next step there?
Yes. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about it because this is a student that has just tended to struggle a lot. And I know for a fact that even in this small group setting that she just feels, she's not confident in herself, and she is still, learning the English language. And I think that that's part of the reason why she just doesn't necessarily feel comfortable stepping out and taking those risks and engaging in discourse with her peers. I get a lot more from her when we're working one-on-one because I think she's just more comfortable. So what I've done as a next step with that student is One, I have engaged one of the specialists from our school to join me in a one-on-one session with her. I think that there are some very specific ways that that specialist would be able to help us navigate the language barriers that exist as we're reading the text and as she's forming, her thoughts in terms of writing them down. I do notice that when we're speaking verbally, she's able to really kind of process and give me a lot in terms of what she knows. But then when I'm asking her to translate that into writing it, that it's a little more difficult for her. So I think the specialist can aid us in that way. And then also seeking to involve her parent. I think that because I can't be with her all the time in this current setting and the specialist can't be with her all the time, it's really important to me that she's able to still be working independently in the times where we're, asynchronous and she's not necessarily with me or the entire group of students. And so just figuring out what ways we can support her caregiver or family at home to be that support for her when she's working on tasks individually outside of our time together.
Absolutely. So I just want to label something else for you that I've noticed as you've been reflecting. Think about that very first lesson where the majority of the lesson was whole group, kind of the direct instruction piece. And this again was we were in the virtual environment. But from the student work collected from that first lesson, you transition to chunking it into smaller groups and spending some individualized time with that small group. And now you've taken it one more step to one-on-one time. Do you think that's something that moving forward, maybe you would consider when you think about planning a lesson, maybe shortening that whole group time to, again, maximize the opportunities for smaller group time, even maybe some one-on-one time that's part of that overall lesson? Would that be beneficial or no?
Absolutely. And I think that this whole process has really helped me think about how I'm planning and what supports I'm building into the structures of the lesson as I'm planning it. And so I think if I could start over again with this standard and this skill, I would, one, absolutely be engaging the support of the specialist at the front end to say, can you, look at my materials? Are you able to join the session with me to support some of the students who I know may have a more intense need in this area? What ways can I accommodate and modify my materials so that I'm a little bit more nimble in terms of meeting all of the kids where they are. So that's definitely like a kind of just a frame of mind that I'm in now as I'm planning. And then as far as time goes, it's definitely a challenge. I'll be transparent about the fact that time is a challenge in this setting, but I definitely think that I can be even more specific about how I group students so that for the students who are closer to mastery of the skill, maybe I'm in with them for 10 minutes. Or maybe not even that, and then it allows me to spend more time with my students who just need more intense support. So it was great to be able to group the students ahead of time. As I was learning how to do breakout rooms, I was doing it randomly at first, but now that I know how to do it where I can plan it in advance, I'm always going to be intentional about structuring my groups in advance so that students who have similar needs or students who can benefit from being in a group with each other and get exposure to other exemplar responses and thought processes can benefit from working together.
Absolutely. So as you think about planning those groups, I know one of the things that you said you've been working on is really using that student work to make those decisions.
Yes.
How can I help you with that? Is there something I could do to support that?
Absolutely. I would love to have you work with me during one of my planning times when I sit down and plan to, I think, one, just assess how I'm differentiating with the material that I'm creating and with the content that I'm building for students. Again, that work that we did on that graphic organizer was so helpful and I think really shifted the outcomes for some of the students that were having a hard time initially. So again, doing that on the front end, I'd love to collaborate on that. And I'd also love to just talk a little bit more about how I can look at the data that comes out of it. So I looked at the exit ticket data. I looked at the written responses. So I love to actually sit down more and just do even deeper data analysis of the student work that the kids are producing and helping that guide where I go next in terms of their instruction and meeting their needs.
I would be happy to be a thought partner in that. And so maybe we could schedule a time to do that.
Absolutely. I'd love that. Thank you.
All right. So let's go ahead and step out. Thank you, Ms. Apple.
Thank you. Great coach.
So let's just step out for just a moment from the role play and let's reflect on those high leverage practices implemented by Ms. Apple and how she supported the diverse needs of the learners in a virtual classroom.
So one thing you'll notice is that Ms. Apple was very intentional about monitoring and interpreting the learner progress and provided the additional supports that the student needed in response to what she saw happening in the lesson and in looking at the data. Also, she incorporated modifications and accommodations and provided a modified graphic organizer to further support the student learning. You'll also notice that throughout the webinar, we've talked about building a team and using this collective support of the other educators and specialists that you have on your team. And Ms. Apple was intentional about seeking support outside of her area of expertise to support an English language learner who was in need. So those are all great ways to meet students where they are and to continue to scaffold to give them exactly what they need to get success.
Just to reiterate something you're saying, Kia, what I really hear is the importance of the intentionality in Ms. Apple's thought process to provide those strategies that are needed to, like you said, to meet kids where they are.
Yes, super intentional and willing to, I think, put forth the time that's needed. I think that's the other thing that I know everyone's juggling a lot right now, but there is going to have to be just an exertion of time to do what's best to meet kids where they are.
Absolutely. Speaking of time, let's give you some time now to pause and plan. So as you think about you and your staff and how you're using those high leverage strategies to provide individualized instruction for students, think again about successes, challenges, and opportunities, and take a moment to reflect on those current practices on your campus. Consider what opportunities exist to maximize outcomes for diverse learners. Jot those ideas down and think about how you're going to hold yourself and your team accountable. You'll find a space to do this stop and jot on page 11 of your participant guide. We'll give you a couple minutes.
So as you start to develop your plans, we'd love to share a few of the considerations, look fors, and action steps that you may be outlining as you begin to plan. So as you think about how to prioritize providing individualized instruction for diverse learners, it's important to create opportunities for specialists, educators, and families to build responsive plans for support. You also want to consider where the content expertise lies on your team so that you can modify curriculum with a focus on the most critical skills required for student success. Also, as you think about how to provide educators with the resources and tools to utilize best practices while consistently meeting the needs of diverse learners, it's very important to continue conducting virtual observations and developing a plan for professional learning responsive to the needs of your building.
The last segment of our webinar today focuses on social emotional support, which aligns to Danielson's classroom environment descriptor 2A, which states that classroom interactions between teacher and students and among students are highly respectful, reflecting genuine warmth, caring, and sensitivity to students as individuals. Students exhibit respect for the teacher and contribute to high levels of civility among all members of the class. The net result is an environment where all students feel valued and are comfortable taking intellectual risks. Social emotional support also aligns to PSEL Standard 5, calling for a community of care and support for students, which states the effective educational leader establishes, implements, and monitors protocols and processes that foster a safe and secure school environment in alignment with school system policies. We have an obligation to create emotionally and physically safe, supportive, and engaging learning environments that promote all students' social and emotional development.
And so as we think about how to do that, Kim, we have the social emotional core competencies, which are self awareness, self management, responsible decision making, relationship skills, and social awareness. Educators must be intentional about incorporating the space and time into instruction to develop these competencies.
It's also critical that the needs of students, families, and educators are considered as the opportunities are facilitated in the virtual school community. So as we think about this idea of two-way communication, as social emotional needs are addressed, it's crucial to create channels for two-way communication among stakeholder groups.
You'll recall in webinar one that we talked through the importance of establishing a multi-stakeholder plan for communication. In this ever-changing context, it will be important to stay abreast of the SEL needs of the entire community by keeping communication channels open. Remember to be intentional about responding to arising needs by devoting time to building community, reflecting on experiences, and listening to students' ideas and concerns.
The Mood Meter is one tool that educators can use to provide space for diverse learners to develop their social emotional core competencies.
Research confirms that feelings have a huge influence on how students are able to perform, and yet often in the moment, students are not really aware of how they're feeling or how those feelings are influencing their behaviors.
So the Mood Meter is designed to help students learn to recognize emotions in themselves and others with increasing subtlety and to develop strategies for regulating or managing those emotions. It provides a learner with the language to talk about their feelings.
And so you'll see here that it's a square that's divided into 4 quadrants: red, blue, green, and yellow, each representing a different set of feelings. Different feelings are grouped together on the Mood Meter based on their pleasantness and energy level. For example, today I'm feeling motivated. That's a rather high degree of energy and also a high degree of pleasantness. It's important to provide this space and opportunity for students to process their feelings because it then gives us as educators the ability to respond to their needs and to understand how they're feeling so we can address that throughout the instruction.
So let's take a moment here to pause and plan. Reflect on your current school practices. Think about how you and your staff are addressing social and emotional needs in the virtual classroom. Once again, think about your successes, challenges, and opportunities. Jot down your ideas and think about how you will hold yourself and your team accountable. You'll find space on page 13 of the participant guide to plan. We'll give you a few moments.
So as you continue building out those plans, again, we'd love to share some considerations and action steps that you may be thinking about. As far as how you will prioritize social emotional learning support for diverse learners, it's so important to establish a clear plan for two-way communication amongst all of your key stakeholders, and also remember to devote time to building community, reflecting on experiences, and listening to stakeholders' ideas and concerns. How might you hold yourself accountable? You will definitely need to identify how SEL will be consistently embedded in personalized learning experiences in your context, and also identify who is going to be responsible for the tracking, monitoring, and providing of ongoing feedback support in this area.
So as we begin to wrap up our webinar session with you today, we want you to think about your learning and your self-reflections today. How will you prioritize your action steps based on urgency and immediate need?
What are the actionable steps that you need to do to begin working toward this next step? So please take a moment on page 14 in your participant guide to record your specific action items.
We appreciate your time spent with us today. If you would like to access some additional resources and explore independently, please find a list of resources here. Once again, we want to thank you for your participation, and always we appreciate feedback. Please feel free to use the camera setting on your phone to scan the QR code, or you can access the link.
This webinar can be located on our Maryland Resource Hub homepage under current events. Please use the link, webinar series, and virtual visit collection tools to locate the webinars and other additional resources. And if you have any additional questions or need additional information, you can contact Ed Mitzel, Executive Director, or Lori Ellis, Coordinator of Leadership Development.